Chelsie, thanks for joining.
Thank
Yo,
you.
Ohayou gozaimasu.
Good, Chelsea. Now you have to say something in Japanese.
Oh man, I'll need a teacher for that. You know anyone?
That's good. So let me quickly introduce Chelsea and Jean. Chelsea being the co-founder and the CEO of Shipsy for the last 3 years, and she's been doing a phenomenal job doing the logistics side of for the retail and brands in the physical. And now Gene, currently he's the founder of Halo Advisory Network, but formerly he was the president, VP of innovations at the Target for almost 18 years. So Gene and Chelsea, hopefully we're going to have a good session today.
Absolutely.
So before we dive into lots of questions that I wanted to ask those two panelists, I would like to go through a few slides to share some of the status of retails in the US. So if you go to the next slide, there you go. So this is actual proprietary data from our portfolio companies called SafeGraph. They've been collecting the location data from millions of smartphone users and annotate to show that actual foot traffic to the point of interest. And this graph shows, relative foot traffic to the previous year. So as you can see, some are coming close to 90% of the last year, such as general merchandise stores. But in the meantime, some are facing still difficult times. If you look at airport, movie theaters, bars, they're still like 60% or even 20% of the last year. And as a result of many of those foot traffic slowdown, JCPenney's, J.Crew, Dean DeLuca, Gymboree, Victoria's Secret, including those names, 25,000 stores got shut down since the COVID. So that's been a big impact. If you go to the next slide. But within some big brands, if you look at Home Depot being the king of home improvement side, which everyone apparently in the US, actually in Japan as well, love to work on homes in the COVID situation, including myself. They've been doing really well. In the general merchandise side, Target seems to be doing pretty well. And maybe it's due to the Gene, you did a too good of job when you were at the Target, and definitely doing better than Walmart. So that's fantastic. So if you go to the next slide, and that's obvious, but the e-commerce has been growing since the COVID, right? If you cannot go to the physical, have to buy online. And it boosted up to 20% adoptions within the retail. Some report says it's up to 30%, but I'm actually surprised that it's still at that 20 to 30%. And I'm sure there's a skew in some merchandise categories or the geographies or the ages. But if you look at what's happening behind the scene, is that many of the tech has been driving the forces of those e-commerce increase. The logistic push has been one of them. If you look at Instacart, the DoorDash, that's been phenomenal value adds and a contribution to the people. Mobile has been a great adoption, and that's been pushing the e-commerce, right? So if you go to the next slide, and clearly there has been easy example of winners, and including the names that I just mentioned, Instacart, DoorDash, helping the last mile delivery of groceries and the food. Stripe being the king of payment in the e-commerce side. Shopify being the major platform for many of the e-commerce sites, and they've been double their market cap since January this year, so they've been doing phenomenally well. On the other hand, Beta Toast, those kind of companies who deal with the physical retails or the restaurants, they've been struggling. So it's been a roller coaster ride for many of those retail and retail tech companies. So with that, I would like to go to the panels with the questions. So the first topic that I would like to pick is that, in general, COVID impact in retail. As I walk through some of the slides, definitely impacted in many different degrees. And some reacted really fast, or actually many couldn't survive. But Gene, you know, the question for you is that in the 18 years of your experience in the retail industry, this must have been very kind of new and different from the past time. And if you look at and if you make some comments and insights on what has been the most difficult things for the large retail box point of view, and what has been kind of the new and the large investment in the tech side from those players, and how maybe it shifted things in the priorities and things are doing differently. But if you could shed a light on some of those insights, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, first up, Rio, thanks for having me on the panel. I'm excited to be here with Chelsea for sure. But to your question, operationally, the two parts. This is a really unusual time, the last 6 months, but two parts on the supply chain. The supply chain is just much more difficult because manufacturing of certain items was just tight. I can't tell you the number of stories you would hear just trying to get things like hand wipes or toilet paper to the stores. So hats off to all the supply chain folks and leaders that were really stepping up and trying to make that as flawless as possible from that standpoint. But then the second part is operationally in the store base. Still a ton of physical or retail was happening. Obviously, tremendous acceleration in e-commerce. But if you had stores that were deemed essential and people were going to stores, you really had to think about things like sanitation and security, stocking things, and that operationally just made added another level of complexity. And hats off to all the field people that were able to handle that. When you think about investments, aside from COVID, ideally the retailers that are winning have made the big investments prior to, like invested in e-commerce, and have done it in a way to make sure the stability and the security of the site is as kind of boring as that sounds. It's absolutely true because you have a mass shift of people going from stores to online, and those things like security and stability of the site becomes really important from that standpoint. And then clearly, something in the Chelsea space, this last mile piece, folks that have created partnerships or saw where the market was going, were able to stand up some capability of partnerships, ideally, to get product to the consumers, to meet the consumers where they're at. And if that's directly to their home, or if that's through a curbside service, because you've got a couple of screaming kids in car seats in your car, to do that easily, or BOPIS, right? The fact that you're online, then picking up from that standpoint.
I see. Have you seen any priority changes in the sense that before the COVID, those are the things that we're gonna do next quarter, and those are the things that we're gonna do, but suddenly COVID hit, and now things got reversed, and new things come in the picture that they need to tackle?
I would say the one thing, not only experienced but also read about and heard from peers in the industry is, really trying to accelerate their ability to do something like a curbside service. Stories like, certain drugstore chains in the U.S. standing that service up in, 5 weeks. Apparel retailers standing up in 5 weeks. If you have the service, trying to expand the assortment that you could put out there, because putting out dry cereal or a towel is very different than putting out perishables like apples and meat, which to some cases need to be refrigerated up to the point where they go into the consumer's car. So that's probably one of the priority changes where you saw people try to put more resources behind.
I see. Yeah, resource allocation definitely be
it's all
very
about
different.
Yes.
Thank you. And Chelsea, you have been a founder and CEO of Shipsy. This is the early stage company working with brand and retails, and I'm sure this is something that you didn't have this in your forecast that when you launch your Shipsy, but maybe you could share your story on how this whole thing impacted you, and how you overcame. And maybe it might be helpful if you could talk a little bit about Shipsy so that people could have a context around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Shipsy is, for those of you who haven't heard of us or know anything about us, Shipsy is the new way to deliver. So we provide any retailer the ability to offer on-demand, same-day, or scheduled delivery natively on their website or through a web link in their stores. And then we partner with driver networks. to make those deliveries. So we're the technology layer that sits in the middle of retail and delivery networks to make it a safe playing field for both. And in terms of, did I have this in my forecast? Definitely not. It's helpful now and something that I'm not banking on in my long-term forecast, but given the enormous surcharges that are on traditional methods, we're actually finding that Shipsy is less expensive for retailers today. So our pitch is pretty easy. Pay more and give it to your customers in 10 days, or pay less and give it to them now or tomorrow between 12 and 2. So, and another 10 days immediately before holiday is also nice to be able to ship. And really, I think before COVID hit, retail was hard enough. And we certainly felt the hit that a lot of retailers did. And specifically for us, our major customers called us and they all had mandated store closures within 48 hours. So given that, it was, the world is on fire for a few weeks until we could figure out how we're going to reduce our burn, how we're going to expedite our roadmap over the next 2 years and 6 months to meet the demand. So I have a lot of empathy for retailers, and a couple of the big things that I'm excited for that we've recently released, and as part of our adoption to the new world strategy is a no integration solution, for example, so that any store associate could receive orders from customers through a text or an email or a phone call and be able to utilize our network of over 1.2 million drivers across the US. So that eliminates the barrier to entry and also allows us to help the small local shops and do some good things for the community, but also allows us to help large enterprise retailers for a large beauty webinar concierge type services. And the retail tech partners, it was really a time for us to understand and latch on to our real serious partners like the Shopify's, like the DoorDash, and know that we had strong enough relationships with them that they were excited for us to make it through and see what it looks like today. So new products, reducing burn while at the same time expediting your 2-year product roadmap. I can't say that my development team is very happy about that, but now I'm really, really excited for what the future has to hold.
Yeah, not just you, but many of our portfolio companies had to go through, immediate and drastic changes to fit with the COVID time. So I think you're doing a phenomenal job out there. But let's zoom into this logistic last mile, and I feel like this is one big elephant in the room that the brands and retailers have been trying to solve, but I actually have to say that it hasn't been successful. I mean, things are getting better like slightly every day, but on efficiency of the logistic point of view, and since the COVID, lots of new kind of things, tech point of view that have been introduced, and some are doing, converting the physical retails to a dark store to do more efficient fulfillment. Some doing autonomous vehicle delivery, some doing drone attempts, and BOPIS, as Jean mentioned, buy online, pick up in store, curbside. Lots of things have been introduced, right? So, but Chelsie, what is this bottleneck that's making this logistic and the last mile difficult, and how do you think that brands and retail should, like, going forward, need to be adapting to the new style?
So I think there's a lot of things. There's probably 3 primary areas of the bottleneck, if you will, that we have learned. And we had the luxury of having some really great advisors who come, former head of product for Uber, for example, taught us all of the complications and nuances that they learned when trying to roll out for retail. And our partners have already learned a lot of those hard lessons for us. So it was nice for us to understand what those nuances were before even building things. And I come from a retail planning and buying and technology systems perspective. So early on in the days, it was really important for us to be able to solve and even know about what these things are and admit that they're problems. So the 3 primary ones I would say are: 1, having a limited geographic reach. 2 is understanding the size, weight, dimensions, inventory visibility. And 3, keeping it native in retail systems or the loyalty of those consumers. So I'll talk about each of those for a minute because I think they're really, really critical in this. So the geographic location of one individual network, I think about it in my mind as a like a dog with a shock collar and a yard on it. They have these zones and restrictions,
Right.
that they can't really cross, and some of them cross. So you might have one person across the street that can't deliver to someone because they all have different zone restrictions or coverage even. And so we aggregate all of those together and let them battle out the price. Whoever the lucky winner is gets to deliver the consumer's goods. So the limited geographic is a big bottleneck in it. In addition to that, understanding the size and the weight and the dimensions, we have visibility onto the inventory. So we don't touch it, we don't change it. We just have visibility. Retail is never going to be perfect. So we might say, Rio, I know you have 10 units on hand, but I'm going to pretend like you have 8. And by the way, you have 8 sofas. So I'm going to make sure that I don't send a guy on a bike to go deliver a couch to your customer, which actually happens. And so that's another reason why our delivery partners really like us and see that success in it as well. And then in terms of keeping it native in the systems, this was something that was really, really important to me early on in even building Shipsy, because brands need that loyalty. They have that strong customer base, and so many things are outside of their control now, or there's an outside app or a outside place that consumers have to go. If I'm buying from a brand that I like, I want to go where I know and where I trust, and that's directly in the retailer's website, and keeping it simplistic. So Shipsy shows up at checkout. Maybe you want it in 7 to 10 days, or maybe Shipsy is available. So making Shipsy appear only when we know there's a driver available, we know that the store is open, we know your inventory is there,
Right.
and getting the best possible price available. And even recently, we've had some sales cycles where major retailers are going through a large RFP process and a small RFP process, which to me is actually shocking that we haven't seen anyone kind of solving for both ends of it, because it's a pain. And a lot of time spent even evaluating.
Yeah, I agree. So it looks like the many brands and retailers are trying many different things, and along the way, similar to what you mentioned, geography restriction, all that. They will figure out the bottleneck. But Gene, from your point of view, that you have known many large retail box play, and what do you think? Like the tech stack that I introduced, what do you think is working out in this COVID situation?
Yeah, I mean, aside from the tech stack, operationally, the tech that's enabling BOPIS is incredibly, helpful. It has been even before. You've seen that curbside as well. But it's also tactics like ship from store. And I say that because when you get into e-commerce and the rise of e-commerce, what starts to really crush you on the economics is the shipping. And so you can multitask a store box and ship from there and reduce the distance you're sending product to consumers. That's incredibly impactful. The other thing I'll say, what I love about Chelsea's example too, is that a lot of the retailers, they still have a strong desire to have the information about the consumer, and so they do want them on their website. And that tends to be when you talk about tech and data, that tends to be the point of contention in many cases. When you start to put someone between yourself and then consumer, is it still the same brand experience? But more importantly, how do I make sure I can still see what's happening through the execution of delivery? And so those are some things that I think are very top of mind for folks in retail.
Got it. At the same time, I, as a venture capitalist, I do go through lots of, different tech companies, and I do see some of the early companies having a phenomenal adoption during the COVID. But at the same time, what we saw in China, as an example, is that, during the COVID situation, in the lockdown, the lots of, robot and autonomous vehicle delivery, it was like all over the place on the street. But once the COVID situation settled down and China became the post-COVID situation ready, those robots and autonomous vehicles like suddenly disappear from the street, and because the ROI was never meant for, and it was just the temporary solution for the situation. When people are back on the street and making delivery,
by bikes or the cars, then that became the norm back. And so giving that example, some of, we have to be skeptical in a sense that some of those tech being newly introduced are not going to make it to the post-COVID, and this is just interim. Gene or Chelsie, if you have that point of view, that what could not remain post-COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious to hear Gene's take on this, because I think that he was ahead of the game in a lot of these things. I think the curbside and the BOPUS will continue to stay the same, which for us makes the transition for store associates even easier because it follows the same process, which is nice. Mm-hmm. I firmly believe that we will see a continued mass fragmentation of on-demand or delivery networks or robots or drones or whatever have you. But I think that probably the biggest driver pre and post COVID is that we've gotten so familiar with having things delivered or having things just at our convenience when we want them. That the concierge type services, I think, will continue because people have a different perspective even on life in general and how they choose to spend their time. And then, I also think that there's a new audience for a lot of these things that weren't in their projections initially, right? Like my grandmother ordering from Target. She had never ordered anything online in her life, and now she likes the Target app, and they won her. And now she doesn't go as frequently, or if she doesn't have to. So I think the new audience and the continued fragmentation, one hope that I have for retail is that they will be firm on their decisions and their focus on what's driving the most value and the largest impact on new customers and continued customers. Before COVID, we saw a mass influx of retailers dipping their toes in the water, and it was a decision paralysis. I'm going to dip my toes in curbside and lockers and buy online, pick up in store, and this digital marketing. And it was almost like there were too many variables to really understand what happened. So my hope is with continued fragmentation, I'm nervous for retail as a whole, that they're going to be kind of good at a lot of things and not really focus on the things that's going to drive the most value back to them and for the retail community.
Oh, I see. So you're saying the fragmentation could bring a complexity or confusions in the market that they might not be able to focus on the core things that, okay. But okay, we have a time limitation, so I wanted to ask a few questions. Gene,
any rebuttals?
Gene, what's your point of view on what could not remain post-COVID situation?
Well, first I'll say I like a lot of what Chelsea's saying, on the convenience bar. I think, this whole concept of on-demand and magic point of sale, you push a button and it shows up when you want. It just elevated the convenience bar where people are going to expect that to be, the norm moving forward. And that's where delivery services and, even things like curbside are, definitely playing in that. I think an extension of that, when the stores come back online, people are going to expect to get out of stores potentially faster, contactless, cashierless, frictionless things. I think, to Chelsea's point, I think retailers are dabbling because they're trying to figure out how that actually works, and can you do that in a mixed goods environment where you actually, you have boxes and rolls and, fixed shaped objects, but you also have sweaters and scarves and towels that kind of flip around. And, how do you do that in a multi-assorted box from that standpoint? As far as what doesn't stay, it'll be interesting to see where autonomous goes. And I think there's real potential in there, but not because of the technology, actually probably because of the policy and the regulation and legislation.
When you say autonomous, you're talking about autonomous vehicle delivery?
Yeah, an autonomous vehicle. But some extent it goes to drones and other things because there's policy and insurance that plays in that just makes those issues so much more complicated. So it'll be interesting. The other thing to kind of watch is, 5G is pretty new. There's two parts. There's the network part and the handheld part. And the handheld part is finally coming. And so let's see what happens there and how the technology is used to kind of amp up experiences for folks, because I think retail is definitely headed for an experiential side too, kind of an experiential explosion, potentially with 5G being the enabling technology.
I see. Yeah. Chelsie, going back to maybe to your grandma, maybe
Yeah.
that could be an interesting one. That do you think she will continue using Target app, or do you think she would prefer going back to the store?
I don't see why she wouldn't continue it. I mean, I've asked her, what are the things, and I think that it's kind of a generational thing as well to have all of the things I need or one backup replenishment on things. So I think that she'll continue it to use it for especially those types of replenishment items or basic items that you need. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and but then I think there's also an opportunity for more local artists because people will want to go experience, strolling around a farmer's market. So
Mm.
I almost see it two very, very conflicting sides of it. Maybe I order the things that I need, or if it costs me the same to get something now, I'll get it. Or if it's a couple bucks extra, maybe I'll get it. But for the most part, I think it's going to be very segmented into either I can get it online and I know what I want, or I know that I can return it, or maybe someone waits for me while I try my things on and then I can return it, or I want to have a day with my girlfriends and go to a winery and do some flea market shopping,
Mm-hmm.
or something smaller and local.
Yeah, I would agree. If I could jump in really quick, the part about
Yeah.
Chelsea's grandma and people that are not digitally native were forced because of COVID
Yes.
to try those behaviors. Order an Instacart, use the app, use DoorDash, and I think a lot of those things will be sticky because people have seen the magic of
Yeah.
convenience on that, and the fact that I don't have to go somewhere week over week and get the same thing. I can just have it delivered now. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gene, I have a
So,
follow-up question for you on that, or a perspective. So you had mentioned Instacart and DoorDash. From a retailer, from a large corporate retailer perspective, what is the impact or the difference that it makes to you if your consumers are going to an outside app versus natively in your website?
I
Good,
think
bad, or indifferent?
I don't think the consumers care as much for sure. I mean, I think what they care about is I want the product when I want it. And you know what? To your point, if I can wait a day and get delivered, that's fantastic because then I've got more time. Time is the only commodity you can't make. I've
Mm-hmm.
got more time to do other stuff. I can tell you my personal experience. We used to be a household that would go to the store every week, stock up on groceries, come back, get the same toilet paper, the same shampoo.
Mm-hmm.
We moved out to the Bay Area and just got put in the digital bubble, and everything's ordered online, and we have just much more time as a family. So I actually believe in the benefit for the consumer there.
Mm-hmm.
I see. But what you guys are talking here, some of things might be obvious to you or to your surroundings, people, but given that some of the audience or the many of the audience today is like from Japan or China or other parts of Asia, for them, COVID actually quickly passed, and people are back onto the back to the normal. So what we are kind of going through right now in the US as a new norm is sometimes it's not what we see in Asia. So it's really like people are really excited to see that how it's going to impact in the next evolution of the retail tech. So that's why I think what you guys are sharing is quite interesting. The actually the time is coming close, but Gene, I have one question. I do believe that whether during the COVID or post-COVID, tech is going to play a big role in changing the way that retailers operate, and startup will have a bigger roles, even more so in the post-COVID. But the large retailers known to be the slow adoption of tech for many years. But at the same time, Target, Walmart has been quite active in acquisition play in the last few years. 4 to 5 companies being bought usually every year, and one of them is usually like logistic related. How do you see a large retail box or the players working with a startup from your point of view?
Yeah, it's definitely an art. I want to say everyone's got it figured out, largely because big retailers, big companies just have a ton going on operationally. They already have a full plate before you add in anything new. And so, working through whether it be an accelerator program or an innovation liaison that can actually help a startup be a startup's guide into the organization and understand it's probably not just one decision maker, but a group of people that need to weigh in and help set those expectations. The other thing I would say too is just understanding the speed, and Chelsie, I'm sure, knows this firsthand. A fast meeting in a startup happens in the next hour. A fast meeting in a big corporation happens in a week, right? And so setting that expectation between the two is helpful, just so you can help manage the relationship properly. It is a lot about expectation there.
Yes.
Not too hard, Chelsie.
Yes. Well, to preface, I come from a corporate box. And so startup for me was a whole new ballgame. I thought it was something that people were building in their garages. And so for me, it was a really, really rude and rough awakening, not coming from someone who had, publicly traded, like I had only worked for large publicly traded companies, basically. So I knew only what it was like outside of the startup box. And so it's great that most of our partners are billion-dollar companies and a handful of our customers as well. But to your point, it gets really tough to manage the expectations on both ends, because we can sprint 1,000,000 miles an hour faster probably, but are we going to be running in circles on something that isn't as serious or isn't as top of priority? And I would say it comes from a lot of grit and polish at the same time. It's a really, really delicate balance. And the other thing that I would say for any founders in the audience is, really, I would push for vulnerability and transparency. They both go a long way, especially utilized at the right time and in the right situation. I would rather say, Gene, I can't support, all 2,000, 3,000 stores today. But why don't we have a safety net for both of us? Because we're not going to be successful if we try and put our skis too far out in front of us, or if we try and bite off more than we can chew. Here's the plan that we're mutually going to agree to and launch from. And things are going to change and we can both adapt. But as long as we have clear expectations from the beginning, I think is just really, really critical. So I would encourage vulnerability and also transparency with all large corporate partners.
Yeah, I think many large corp will go through those, I don't know what do you call it, but the learning process to work smoothly with the startup. I think it's going to happen. And this whole COVID situation, if there's one thing that's good to happen, is that this urgency and technical innovations adoption has been definitely accelerated. So that's as a VC who is investing in retail tech, that's we couldn't hope for more. So we have questions from the audience, but unfortunately we're running out, and my admin is pushing me to finish the session. So with that, thank you, Gene and Chelsie, for a great session today. Hopefully you two enjoy it too, and hope to see you soon in person. Thanks again for joining today.
Yeah.
Thank you.